Be back with another video. I hope all of you are keeping well and are recovering from a very intense and fun Australian Open 2 weeks. If you're in Europe or the UK like me, you will try and be getting your body clocks back to some sort of parity. It's been a crazy couple of weeks, but I just really wanted to come on here and dissect Djokovic versus Alcaraz in the final, a little bit of a summary in terms of how I felt Djokovic did in this year's Australian Open and where he gonna goes from here in my opinion. But the first kind of feeling that I have to really share with all of you is that I think me and a lot of Djokovic fans who I've spoken to have just got so much immense pride, happiness, and we're in awe of the fact that Novak Djokovic, coming up to his 39th birthday, is still giving us so much joy. He's still having us on the edge of our seats. He's still producing miraculous performances. And for that, we can't thank him enough, really. I've done a video about how special Djokovic's win was against Sinner and just how important it was. And we'll kind of take off from there, really. Obviously, going on from that, Djokovic had just beaten Yannick Sinner for the first time in 5 attempts in 4 hours of pulsating tennis, where Djokovic literally threw the kitchen sink at Yannick Sinner and withstood a lot back from Yannick Sinner. A record number of winners for Yannick Sinner, a record number of aces for Sinner. It was a very, very strong performance by Sinner as well, but Djokovic was just so good. And he put his heart, body, blood, sweat, tears, mind into beating Sinner. Now, that match, if you remember, finished quite late. Now, this is quite important because this is kind of, you look into this going into the Alcaraz final, and he finished about 2-3 o'clock local time. By the time Djokovic has had a warm down, had something to eat, has done all his press obligations, which are mandatory, he apparently went to sleep at 6 o'clock in the morning. So that would be the Saturday morning. So the final was on Sunday early evening. So Djokovic has had less than 48 hours to recover after just putting in one of his greatest performances in recent times. And in terms of his age, you can probably say his greatest performance ever. So already going into that final, my preview was that I'm not as confident as Djokovic beating Alcaraz as I was with Sinner, even though the bookmakers didn't agree. So the bookmakers famously had Djokovic as high as 10-1 to beat Sinner, which was the highest price that he's ever been on. But I felt that he had that grit in between his teeth and he was playing good enough to beat Sinner, and he did. For Alcaraz, his odds came down to about 3 or 4-1, which means that he's still a big outsider to win that match, but not as much of an outsider as he was against Sinner. But I felt that it was a much more difficult match for Djokovic. So he was going into that match after Alcaraz with less than 48-hour recovery time. Now, at any age, having less than 48 hours after you've just played 4 hours in a very, very intense match is simply not long enough. So Djokovic wouldn't have been fresh. Now, the other issue that Djokovic has, and anyone who follows Djokovic for many, many years knows that one of the things that he hates playing against, is the wind. And he's been kind of quite open to that and said, it impacts his timing, his rhythm. And Djokovic is very much, his game is based on timing, his rhythm, where, the wind becomes a big issue for his intensities, for his ground strokes, for his position, for his depth. So for a number of reasons, the wind doesn't suit his game. Now, that final, Alcaraz not only had extra hours, vital hours of a recovery time. So obviously his match finished early evening in Australia. So he would have been fast asleep in bed, no doubt, when Djokovic was playing against Yannick Sinner. So he had a lot more recovery, but he had a very windy day. It was a very windy day, one of the windiest days on the finals. And Alcaraz, like Nadal, is known to be a player that adapts well to the wind, but also plays well in windy conditions. Now let's go to the first set, because Djokovic started immaculately. So he kind of left off pretty much where he finished with Sinner, in that his forehand was on fire. He was hitting winners from all parts of the court. He was serving well. His intensity was well. And he took that set fairly comfortably, 6-2 in just over half an hour. And Carlos Alcaraz at that stage was looking shell-shocked. He really was. Nadal reaction when Djokovic won that set 6-2 was one of shock. Now, I said at the time that, I don't want to get too excited with that because we'd seen that Djokovic had beaten Alcaraz in the first set 6-1 in the Wimbledon 2023 final and lost on also a very, very windy day. Now, the wind is picking up as that match goes on, and it's starting to have an impact on Djokovic. But what Djokovic kind of has told us since then is after the first set, he felt something go wrong. Now, Djokovic being Djokovic isn't going to kind of tell us what that is. He doesn't want to take anything away from Alcaraz, but he alluded to the fact that he had picked up an injury, which kind of really makes sense because if you look at the first set stats and you look at the second set stats, they are like chalk and cheese. They're completely different. It's like watching a completely different match. As Alcaraz's level was still good, Djokovic's level went from very, very high to very, very low in that second set. And he'd called the physio and we'd seen that he'd taken some pain relief as well. So he obviously was in some sort of difficulty here and he wasn't moving as well as he was in the first set. So Alcaraz capitalized. He took the second set relatively comfortably, took the third set. We're going into the fourth set, and I think a lot of people thought that Djokovic now would just lay over and he's not doing well. But he fought so hard. And he actually forced break point late in that fourth set when they were 4-all, I believe it was. And he had a second serve and he had a great chance to take that break, and then he would have been serving for the fourth set and it would have gone into a fifth set, which would have been really interesting because we saw how Djokovic rose and how the crowd really helped him give that adrenaline against Sinner. So that could have happened against Alcaraz. But Alcaraz managed to hold, and then he managed to break Djokovic when Djokovic was serving to take the match into the tiebreak. He took the match in just over 3 hours. It was a good match. It was a good final. I'm not going to say it was the greatest final, but it was a good final. It was a very, very competitive final. And my overwhelming kind of reaction to that was just of pride, really. The fact that Djokovic competed with Alcaraz, took that first set, and this is on the back end of his 4-hour win against Jannik Sinner. So I was very, very pleased. And, it was interesting to kind of, I was interested to see what Djokovic felt, but he put a very, very eloquent speech out as ever. He worried a few people because he said, hopefully he's back, but he doesn't know, who knows what happens in 12 months. And that's a pretty natural reaction when you've just come off a very, very disappointing defeat. So I wasn't reading too much into that. But in the press conferences that he did with in Serbia, he then alluded to the fact that he felt there was something wrong in that second set. And that's when my happiness went to a little bit of sadness because I was thinking, I don't mind if Djokovic loses fair and square and he's lost with a better player. Never have an issue with that and never will do. But, if the fact that his level was dipped due to an injury, that again then becomes very, very unlucky. And people will say, well, that is tennis, and it is, and there's nothing that we can do about that. Djokovic had some luck earlier in the tournament with Mensik and against Musetti, so this time the luck didn't stand with him. But so there's a bit of disappointment there because you think, well, if it was an injury, if he didn't get injury at that time, he would probably be sitting on number 25 right now. But the overwhelming kind of calculations from that is that Djokovic is still very, very much an elite tennis player. So his confidence after this Australian Open, and now he's had a few days to mull over it, is going to be super, super high. Because let's face it, 2024, I don't think Djokovic was 100% motivated, 100% well prepared for all of his slams. And he had a lot of other things going off, a lot of obligations, sponsor obligations. He was doing loads of stuff with the family, which is great. But I don't think his sole emphasis was on all those 4 slams, and he was very unlucky in those slams as well because he got picked up injuries and illnesses at the worst possible time. But he still made 4 semis. So Djokovic has now made a final of a slam when he has, in my opinion, prepared really, really well. He's beaten Sinner for the first time in 5 matches. Now, Sinner was on this crazy unbeaten run. Is it 19 games unbeaten Australian Open? Everyone was saying he's unbeatable on Australian Open. He loves the surfaces. He loves the courts. He loves the conditions of Australia. And everyone had, the bookmakers had him as a clear favourite to win the whole title. He was a huge favourite. He won to 100 to beat Djokovic. He was that much of a clear favourite to beat Djokovic. So the fact that Djokovic beat Sinner when Sinner played well, let's make no bones about that, and then went so close against Carlos Alcaraz should give him a huge amount of confidence to say, actually, if I prepare well, I can still beat the 2 best players on the planet at the moment. So I think his motivation is going to actually go higher when he actually sits down and thinks, yeah, I think I'm really happy with that. He's moved up to number 3 in the world and he's nearly 39 years old. He's just made the final of a Grand Slam. He was very, very close. A few points here and there, and he would have been sitting with number 25 as we speak now. So, that's going to give him motivation. That's going to give him confidence. And where I see Djokovic is, for those of you who are familiar with the world of boxing, boxers only fight maybe 3 or 4 times a year, the elite boxers. And the reason why they don't fight that many times, and some of them even less, maybe 2 or 3 times, is they go away on boxing camps. They go away from their loved ones. They kind of switch themselves off. This is before the fight, and have 4 to 6 weeks of extensive training, extensive work on their diet, fitness, conditioning. So they're in prime condition for when that fight actually turns around. Now, I feel Djokovic is going to do very, very similar to in the Grand Slams now. He is going to go away before a Grand Slam and do a 4-week, 1-month kind of camp where he switches himself off. You won't hear or see of him a lot on social media. He's just going to be working hard, eating well, sleeping well, recovering well, but working really, really hard to get himself in really tip-top shape. So that's where I think Djokovic is going to kind of do. I think he's going to be really focused for the slams. I said before the Australian Open that I thought he would go deep in Australian Open, but I thought because he didn't have that many games, competitive games prior to the Australian Open, I thought he might just fall short, which is what happened. But for me, Wimbledon and the US Open are the 2 best opportunities for Djokovic to get to number 25. Wimbledon is obvious. I think in the last 5 or 6 years, Djokovic's game is really suited and held up very, very nicely on grass. And the most important thing, because of the age, is that it's going to be the shortest game. So Wimbledon are always the shortest games. They're the faster points. There's more quick points. And I think that's going to be a really, really good chance for him. The US Open, I always feel Djokovic plays well in the US Open as well. And he'll be keen to kind of get another title on there. I think he's only got 3, which, but he's had a lot of bad luck. So his luck is due to turn at the US Open. So I think those 2 are the ones that I would be focusing on. Now, a few people have said he should miss Roland Garros. I don't think it's a bad shout. The main reason for that is because of just what's said, is in terms of what I've just said in terms of the camp. So the turnaround from Roland Garros to Wimbledon is 2 weeks if you get to the final. Now, if Djokovic went deep at Roland Garros, he has then not got time to do this camp and get ready for Wimbledon. So that's where I think he needs to make a decision. If he thinks he can win Roland Garros, he can do the month training before, and whether that includes playing in an event as part of that training, that could work well. But if he thinks that his best chance of winning a slam is going to be Wimbledon, then I would feel that he's got, he will make a good decision by missing Roland Garros and just working really, really hard and maybe even play a warm-up tournament, maybe do Queens if he was to miss Roland Garros. So he's got that match behind him as well. But that's his decision. But Djokovic has said since in in another conference once the dust is settled that he is motivated by his performance at the Australian Open, and he's still very excited that he is still knocking on the door and there or thereabouts. So I don't think that we are going to see a retirement yet, but I don't think Djokovic is going to play huge amount of events or tournaments. But we already know that. We already know that. So there's no big shot there. But I think he is going to be very, very motivated for the rest of the slams this year. So yeah. So for me, immense pride. I can't be disappointed with this. Djokovic made the final. He beat Sinner. That was so important. Sinner, for so many reasons. But let's talk about the crowd. Everyone screaming, "No lane, no lane." I've never seen so many fans behind him against Sinner and Alcaraz. These are two of the top players in tennis at the moment. They're supposed to be very, very popular, and nearly all the stadium were behind Djokovic in both of these matches. So it's very, very interesting that some of the fans and some of the media who have hammered him. Let's be honest, for 10, 15 years, are now turning around saying, maybe we got things wrong. He's actually a really, really nice guy, really, really respectful. You know, we've known that for years. We've known that since 18. The reason that I was attracted initially to Djokovic as a player when he was 17, 18 was the fact that I saw something in him that I didn't see in other players. I saw a great determination, a great level of respect, but he was also very, very funny. He had a great sense of humor, and on the court, he just was different from the rest. He had that extra little bit something inside of him that the other players don't seem to go. He had that ability to just dig deeper than other other players. But he's always been so respectful of opposition players. He's also respectful of people that have turned against him. He's still being nice and respectful to Rafa Nadal after Rafa Nadal stuck what he did to him in 2022 too, and really hit Djokovic when he was at his lowest ebb, and he turned on him as a player council's member at the time was pretty scandalous, and a lot of people wouldn't have forgiven or forgotten that. But Djokovic is still very, very civil. He's still very civil, respectful to the likes of Roger Federer, who gave him a rough time for many, many years. But this is Novak Djokovic. This is why he is such an amazing person, a really kind, considerate, nice, generous, just an amazing guy. Yeah, he really is. And finally, it's good to see that so many people are now finally giving him the credit that he deserves. And I think people appreciate the fact that he's still going at the age of 38, 39. You look at people like Nadal, who's is about a year, less than a year older than Djokovic, and you look at them standing next to each other, and no one will guess that there's only a year difference in them. Nadal has aged a lot worse than Djokovic, and I think that's testament to Djokovic, the way he's looked after himself in terms of what he puts in his body, in terms of what he doesn't put in his body, in terms of his practice, his preparation, his dedication, and I think people are appreciating that Djokovic is still very much there, and his metabolic age is going to be a lot less than 38. I still think he's got an engine of someone in their early 30s, not their late 30s. And if you look at the top 10, he is the only player in the top 10 that is in his 30s. So he's at least a decade older than anyone else in the whole of the top 10, which is just phenomenal, really. But yeah, so that was my overriding thoughts. I'm incredibly proud, very, very happy. I can look back on the Australian Open very, very fondly. I've already watched the Sinner match so many times. I said at the time it was one of his most special, most important, most emotional victories. I stand by that now. And next time Djokovic plays Sinner is now going to have a different mindset. Now he knows that Djokovic has got that confidence to beat him, even when Sinner is still very much on the peak of his form. So really happy, really excited. I think all fans, Djokovic fans, a few of them were sad, and it's natural when you lose a slam, you get so close. Some of them are sad, but I really don't feel in an instance there's any need to be sad. He's improved He's made his first slam final in 18 months. He's up to the world number 3. He beat Yannick Sinner, who was, one of the unbeaten players, 19 match unbeaten at Australian Open. And he went very, very close against Carlos Alcaraz. So, a lot of positives. So don't stress. I think Djokovic is going to now deservedly take a break, spend some time with the family, because it's not only the slam, it's the weeks before that hard work. So he deserves some time away now with his loved ones to just recharge, reset, and then I think at the end of February he will then make a decision. I think his next one will probably be Indian Wells, maybe. There's potentially Doha and a few in the Middle East that he could play, but I think he'll probably have a break and then probably head over to the States March, April, maybe plays Indian Wells or Miami or one of the two, and then make a decision in terms of does he want to play Roland Garros or does he want to save himself for Wimbledon. But we trust Djokovic. He's got a brilliant team with him. He is, he's going to be in good shape. Unfortunately, we don't know what the extent of the injury was or is, but we're hoping that it's not going to be a long-term problem. And we know that he's got a great medical team, so hopefully they'll get him back in tip-top shape soon. So yeah, so that was my thoughts really. Congratulations, I have to say, to Carlos Alcaraz. He's doing extremely well now, and he's up to what, 7 slams, I believe, which is really, really phenomenal. He'll keep going. But for those who are saying that he's going to get to 24, if he gets to 24, good luck to him. But he's got a long way to go yet. And the way that Alcaraz's game is, it's a very physical game. So he could go down the route of Nadal and pick up injuries and really struggle once he turns past the age of 30. So it's a long way to go, and you don't know what can happen in the world in tennis. And, I'm quite happy at the moment that Djokovic is on 24 and knocking on the door of 25 and still giving us so much joy. I've spoken to quite a lot of the Noel fam that went to Australia, and they just said it was an amazing experience. A lot of them have lost voices for a couple of days. They were shouting that much, but they just had the best time. And my thanks to them, because we could all see how much you put into each other's matches, and it gives them that lift. So many thank you to them. Thanks to everyone who's been following me on X. It's been, it was a crazy 2 weeks. I was doing about 2 million views a day on average during the whole of the Australian Open, so that was quite intense. Yeah, thanks for all the support and thanks for all the haters as well. And it's interesting I think it's interesting to give people a different perspective. I know some people think I'm toxic, or I'm the worst person in the world, but all I simply try and do is try and give a little bit of perspective, a little bit of what I actually see is actually happening, as opposed to a lot of the tennis media that are simply paid to do what the establishment tell them to do. And we've seen in politics now that is the case. So there's no reason to suggest that nothing different happens in tennis as well. They're essentially puppets, and anyone who speaks up or against them, they will vilify and target and try and brandish names. And I've had all of that, but it's water of a duck's back for me. As I said, this is very, very passionate for me. It's a sport that's given me so much, and I'm going to keep on trying to tell people what is really happening out there. So thanks for all the support. As I said, it was an intense 2 weeks, not much sleep, but really, really proud of Djokovic. So yeah. So take care wherever you are. We will be back with more tennis soon. As I said, I don't know when Djokovic is going to play yet. I'm not going to make any predictions. Let's see how he gets on, and let's give him his rest and respect that he deserves. And then we'll see in a few weeks once the dust settles even more. Okay, all the best. Take care. God bless wherever you are, and I will be back with the video soon. Take care. Either more.